Hi there, and thanks for watching our video training series. The topic of this video is going to be all about getting the most out of Marketo Interactive Webinars. Marketo Interactive Webinars, for those of you who have not used them yet, are webinars that are entirely created, hosted, and delivered within the Marketo platform. So this feature combines Adobe Connect's webinar functionality with the Marketo program UI and allows for end-to-end setup, delivery, and reporting for your webinars to happen entirely within Marketo. In terms of what we're going to cover in this video, we're going to talk about how to set up a program template in Marketo to take advantage of all of the new features and functionality within the interactive webinar product. So we'll look at some of the different types of smart campaigns and smart lists that you may want to set up as part of your webinar program templates. We'll look at some other setup best practices around tokens, member statuses, custom fields, and then we'll look at how to take all of that great engagement data that you're capturing during the course of your webinars and bring that information to your CRM and into the hands of your salespeople. And finally, we'll look at some different ways of reporting and visualizing the interaction data that you're capturing within your webinars themselves. Quick introduction around myself. I am a senior marketing operations consultant here at Nomad. I've been working within the Marketo space for over 10 years with a variety of experience across different size companies in both in-house and consultant roles. And I've been working specifically in the interactive webinar product since it was released by Marketo early last year. So I'm really excited to share some of the learnings and best practices that we've learned as an organization in helping our clients take best advantage of this new webinar product. A little bit about Nomad Marketing more broadly. We are a New York City-based group of marketing operations consultants. We work across the full gamut of marketing automation platforms, CRM platforms, routing and enrichment platforms, BI and visualization platforms, really any part of the marketing and sales technology stack we have in-house expertise within. And a big part of our operating model is constantly collaborating and sharing that expertise amongst our team internally and with our clients to help them really take best advantage of all of the new features and functionalities that are constantly being rolled out across the different products in their technology stacks. Now that we've gotten introductions out of the way, we're going to jump into a live demonstration within our Marketo sandbox environment. And again, take a look at some of our best practices, tips, and tricks around building a Marketo interactive webinar program template and reporting on the interactions within interactive webinars themselves. Before I do that, I'm just going to quickly jump into the admin section of Marketo and look at our program member statuses for our webinar channel. Again, we're looking here at the standard webinar channel setup within Marketo. And what I really want to highlight here is that we've added a new program status here called high value interaction. Ultimately, what you call this is completely up to you and what makes the most sense for your business. But what I really want to call out is this is one of the ways that's going to enable us to build that additional level of insight into how people are interacting with our webinar content and potentially pass that information into our CRM or trigger additional workflows in our Marketo environment based on those interactions. So in terms of how we're going to set up our actual webinar program template itself, it really doesn't need to be all that different from how you might have your existing non-interactive webinar programs set up in Marketo. There's a few things that I want to call out just as a general webinar setup tip, and then we'll talk about some of the Marketo interactive webinar specific things that you might want to consider as you're building out your templates. First, I want to highlight our program tokens here. Again, a lot of these things are tokens that you hopefully are already using within your own program templates themselves. But one thing that I do want to call out here is that I've added a new local token within this webinar called polling question 1. And I've typed in the value here of the first polling question that we're asking in the webinar itself. This is useful to us because we can output the text value of this token in things like alerts, tasks, interesting moments, or other flow steps that we can utilize later on within our program template. Even though the actual content within the webinar activities themselves aren't yet able to be output as tokens. So this gives us a way to take some of the specific interactions that are happening inside our webinar and templatize them and operationalize them in a way that we can use more easily across our Marketo environment. Again, you can expand this however you may want to. If you're asking multiple polling questions, you can add multiple tokens in there if you want each of the potential responses to your polling questions to also be able to be output as tokens. That's a completely valid approach. Again, we'll look at some of the ways that we'll utilize this information later on as we go through the setup of this program template. So as we get further into the program template itself, the first thing that I want to pull up is our attended smart campaign. And I want to look at our smart list configuration here. So what we're going to see is, and you may have noticed this already in your Marketo environment, but every Marketo has been given an additional set of triggers and filters related to interactive webinar activity. So you'll now see there's a trigger for asks a question, attends event, clicks on a link, downloads an asset, and responds to poll. And these triggers are all automatically updated during the course of your interactive webinar delivery itself. So if someone asks a question in your Q&A pod within your webinar, it creates a asks question at webinar activity in their Marketo activity log, and we can then use this trigger to respond to that. You also have filters set up for these as well. So if you forget to activate your triggered campaigns, you can always run a batch or pull a smart list by using the clicked on a link, downloaded an asset, has asked a question, has attended event, or responded to a poll webinar filters. So again, these are all related to those new activities that are a part of interactive webinars. And as such, they all have additional constraints and attributes that you can view if you are in someone's activity log and you're opening up those activities, or in our case, if we're looking at the available constraints on those filters and triggers. So in terms of how we might want to use this, in our attended smart campaign here, we're just using the attends event trigger. And again, this is an activity that gets created whenever someone joins an interactive webinar. And so what we've done here is add an additional constraint for watch duration in minutes. And this is essentially allowing us to only consider people as truly attending this event if they watched for at least 10 minutes. Again, what you specifically put in here is completely up to you. You have additional constraints around whether or not they interacted with any of the polls or Q&A pods. You could do a percentage rather than a number of minutes in terms of how much they watched for. And you can use the event mode to distinguish between people who viewed the on-demand or the live version of the session. But for our purposes, we're just looking to see anyone who attended the event for at least 10 minutes here. And our flow step here is very simple. Again, in this case, we're simply using that trigger to update their program status to attended and add them to a static list. Again, we can always utilize that attended event filter if we want to pull a smart list later on down the road. But for now, we're also adding them to a static list that's a part of our interactive webinar program template. So again, we can look at some of the other triggered smart campaigns that we've set up for those other webinar activities. Asks a question. And here again, we can constrain on a specific question or whether or not the question was answered by the panelists during the event. And in this case, our flow step is also simply adding them to a list. Again, this is a simplified version of how you might want to use this. And it's worth thinking about those different webinar activities and whether or not you may want to automate some type of follow-up action based on someone taking those activities. So to that end, let's take a look at a batch campaign that I ran after this webinar was completed. That's simply called poll response high value. So again, what we're going to use here is the responded to a poll trigger, and we're going to tap into that program status that we created for high value engagement. What we're doing here is essentially constraining on the specific poll question that we asked, that we're considering a high value engagement, and the specific response or responses that correspond to what we're considering a high value engagement. So if someone responded with Pisces to the poll question of what is the most common zodiac sign, we want to consider them a high value engagement and pass that person to our sales team, potentially apply some scoring, add them to a drip campaign. Ultimately, what we do with that information is completely dependent on what makes sense for our business. But in our example here, we have a couple of different flow steps that we're running. First, we are, again, changing their program status to that high value interaction status. We, again, could then use this to trigger things like scoring, life cycle progression, sales alerts, notifications, interesting moments. In our case, for now, we're just setting their program status to that new status. We're also updating a program member custom field here. And again, this is another one of those ways that we may want to get this information into our CRM in a way that is easily parsable by our sales team or other people who are looking at the results within our CRM environment. So we have a program member custom field called Webinar Poll Response 1, and we're just stamping the response that corresponds to the smart list we set up in the value of this field. So again, if we have this program member custom field connected to a Salesforce campaign member custom field, anyone who's looking at a campaign report within our CRM environment is now going to be able to see the specific response that this person gave to that poll question within the campaign member view. Again, one of the reasons we're doing this is because we don't have the ability to actually output the value of their response and the questions as tokens yet. So this is a nice little workaround to still get some of that information over to our CRM environment. And similarly, we could also do something like create a task to assign to the salesperson who owns those records. That again just lets them know that they responded to the poll question. And here you can see we're utilizing the program token that we set up earlier for polling question and what their specific answer was. So those are some of the different ways that you can think about taking the information that you're collecting over the delivery of your webinar and actually pulling it into Marketo, getting it in on the person record or the program member record, and then pushing that data over to your sales team and your CRM. And then separately, one other way we can think about this is in a more general setup. I have another batch campaign here that I ran after this webinar completed. And in this case, what we're looking for is just any type of interaction within this webinar. So I've pulled in all 4 of those interaction filters. And in my flow step here, I'm simply creating an interesting moment, giving it a type of webinar. And in the description, I'm just saying something very simple like, so-and-so interacted with either a poll, Q&A pod, or call to action, web link, or file download during the course of this interactive webinar. And again, in the interesting moment itself, we can reference any of the tokens that we're setting up within our program setup. So the ultimate output of that interesting moment is going to look something like this. Again, this is a very generic version of that. Depending on how you're configuring your program tokens, depending on what it is that you might want to create interesting moments for, you have a little bit of flexibility in terms of what you want to output in the body of those interesting moments themselves. But again, the key thing here is now if someone in our CRM is reviewing the MSI panel on their leads or contacts or accounts, they'll see this now as an indication that somebody has truly been interacting with the content inside of our interactive webinar itself, rather than just passively consuming the webinar audio presentation. So again, I ran both of these two smart campaigns as batches after the fact, but again, if you have some forethought and you're thinking ahead of time, we could have just as easily set these up as triggers like we did the other core trigger campaigns. I really just wanted to illustrate here that because Marketo is capturing that activity on the activity log, we can use either triggers or filtered batch campaigns to process and automate based off of that. So again, those are a couple of ways to think about automating or scheduling some batches to process the people who are interacting with your webinar as a follow-up. What we may also want to do is just simply get some reporting around how much interaction were we getting, who was doing what kind of interaction. And there's a couple of ways we can do that. The first thing you'll see is on the dashboard tab of the webinar program itself. This is a new tab that is only really available for webinar programs that are using Marketo Interactive Webinars. But you do get a nice little aggregate view here of how many people are engaging within your webinar itself. So you'll see the breakdown of program statuses across all of the members of the program. You'll see how many people attended and what percentage of the webinar they stayed for. You can see an overview of the different poll questions that you asked during the course of that webinar, as well as how much activity you received in your web links or file downloads pods if you were including additional content there for people to interact with. And you will see if you post the webinar on demand, how many people are joining the on-demand version of the webinar and what percentage they watched for. So that's kind of an aggregate view. Again, this is not something that you're able to export for now. But again, what we might want to do is just set up a basic smart list so that we can see specific types of interactions just for our own reporting purposes. Here, again, just to illustrate another one of the interactive webinar filters, I'm using the clicked on a link. And again, this is specific to interactive webinars. So this is not clicked on a link in an email or a web page. And I'm looking for our primary call to action that we used in this demo webinar. So I'm just using the contains constraint here to grab the end of that URL. And if I go to my people tab here, I'll see everyone who attended that webinar who clicked on that specific link. Again, I don't have to do anything with these people per se right now, but this is just a really quick way of getting the specific breakdown of who did what during the course of my webinar. Of course, I could have done something similar to our smart campaigns here and added them to a static list as a trigger as soon as they clicked on that link. But again, for our purposes here, we're really just interested in viewing a quick report of how those people are engaging. Okay, so hopefully that was a useful view into how you can take advantage of all of the great engagement level data that is now being passed into your Marketo through the Marketo Interactive Webinar product, and how you can better automate getting that information to your sales team, applying scoring, creating interesting moments, and otherwise actioning on the people who are interacting with your content during interactive webinars. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us here at Nomad. You can find our website on the screen here. We have a Marketo hotline where you can submit any burning questions you may have about Marketo Interactive Webinars, Marketo more generally, or really any part of your marketing and sales operations technology stack. We are here to help. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you so much for your time. I hope this was a useful session, and I hope to see you all on the next one.